Hello guys, this is LenaLuciia. Welcome back, and today I want to talk to you about all the books I read in October and November, and I'm really excited about this. However, I'm a little sick, so I also have my tea here, so feel free to just grab your comfort drink of choice and let's just yap about some books. Okay, so as for the genre, I actually read 6 books in total. One of those that I don't have with me anymore, I already sold. They were 2 fantasies. One of them was YA, one of them was adult fantasy. It was actually 2 fiction novels, which is something I really don't usually read. And then I also read a classic, which is actually a genre that I really enjoy. I've never really read a classic I absolutely hated. And then the last one is actually a thriller. So we have a wide array, and usually I reach for fantasies a lot more, so this is definitely very much out of my comfort zone of reading, but I did most of all enjoy these books. So let's get right into the first one. So these are not necessarily in like the right reading order that I had them, but the one I definitely know I finished first was Queen of the Damned by Anne Rice, and you can see this is well loved. Like the title page is almost non-existent. However, I also got these secondhand, so you can tell they're just old, but obviously this has been through a lot. I actually read most of this while I was in my beer tent era, still working, so this has a well-loved feel to it. You can see it's like the tiny English paperback kind of thing, where it's actually such tiny writing that you can barely read it and there's like no chapter break at all. But I really love those kind of books. It was definitely a little brick to get through. This has almost 500 pages, and as you can see, the writing is tiny. This is the third book in the Vampire Chronicles. So basically there's the movie, and the first book is called Interview with the Vampire. I think that's Brad Pitt is playing in it, I think. I watched the movie like way back with my dad. He kind of got me back into it because he read, or has, I think, just finished the whole kind of series, and Anne Rice, unfortunately, I think also just recently, a couple of years ago, passed away, but she's completed her whole series and her whole Roman Empire, which this definitely is. I'm on the third book, and honestly, I love this book even more than the first 2, and I feel like with each book I read, I get more and more engrossed with the story, because the first one was like, okay, I kind of knew the story obviously already, and it's told from Louis's point of view, which is the first vampire that is like introduced, who tells essentially his own story, and in that you get to meet Lestat and another little companion that they have. Obviously don't want to spoil anything. And the second book was from Lestat's perspective, so you do like a 180 kind of. In the first book, Lestat doesn't really come off as like a very good person. I mean, obviously the vampires, you know, it's all morally very great, but he doesn't come off as like a great character. And then in the second book, it kind of does like a 180 and you kind of see his point of view. And what she did really well in the second one too is like she brought it all back to like the present moment, and she actually referred his whole story, because in the second one, Lestat is telling his story, to the 1980s, which was when this was written, so I thought that was really interesting. And then this introduces a lot more characters. There's also some other mystical creatures that make an appearance in this, and I just love this because the whole character network that is built up in this book was so beautifully interwoven. And I did have obviously my favorite point of views, but I enjoyed generally all of them. So every time you switch point of views, I was like, oh, I'm really interested to see what they're doing now, but then also I kind of want to get back to them. And it was just, the pacing was really good. The storytelling, like hands down, I mean, I'm not trying to hate on like any like book talky books, because obviously they have their right to be there and romanticize for the win, you know, like I'm not gonna hate on them. But if you want like proper literature, like actual insane storytelling, great writing, it's like a little bit oldish obviously, but I love more of like the classical writing, you have to read this one. The vibes are immaculate too. It's like kind of gothic but not too depressing. It's more like sensual but not sexual. I could yap about this book forever, and if you have read this or any of the books, please let's talk about it, because I want everybody to read this. Honestly, I love it. I absolutely love it, and I cannot wait to get into the other book. I think there's like 12 books in the series in total, and then 3 more of like a spin-off series of some characters that were also introduced here. And you guys, it's just absolute one of my favorites. 4.5 stars. I love this book, and Anne Rice is just a mastermind in my opinion. Going on to the very other spectrum of fantasy, I actually read the first book in the Skulduggery Pleasant series. This one's called The Dead Famous Bestseller. These are just absolute fun YA books. I actually read this in under 24 hours because it's like the absolute contrast to the other book. It's like big writing, huge margins, just super easy to fly through. It was such a fun story. I am very intrigued to maybe continue this series at one point. I just had a lot of fun. I would say probably 3.5 stars. It wasn't anything crazy, but I thought that the scenes were pretty well fleshed out and I did have a good time. And I mean, I read it in under 24 hours, so it has to kind of stand for the pacing of this book. Really did enjoy. And also it actually draws on some of H.P. Lovecraft's stories, which is something that I also really enjoy, that also my dad got me into. So if you want a really cool, easy, fast-paced YA fantasy kind of mystery thriller horror thing, try it out. Making the jump into fiction, I did also read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, and I don't have it with me anymore because, as I said, I already traded it for some other books because that's usually what I do when I'm finished with a book. And I really enjoyed reading this. However, don't get me wrong, the story is absolutely mind-bending. It's so meta too, because it's essentially about a girl who is friends with a really good selling author, and she herself hasn't really had any luck or any success in the publishing world. And then this happens in the first chapter, so it's not really a spoiler. Her friend dies, and essentially she takes her left manuscript and kind of repurposes it a little bit and kind of sells it or publishes it under her name. And there's a lot of criticism for like the publishing industry in that book. There's also a big theme of what role ethnicity plays in the publishing industry, and that they're whitewashing of some authors, or in this case actually kind of portraying a more diverse ethnic background to somebody who doesn't really have that. And it plays a lot with like representation in the publishing industry and kind of how big the margin is for authors of different backgrounds, and that was really interesting. The storytelling was also really good. I think R.F. Kuang is a really skilled writer, and I think her pacing was really good. There wasn't really a point in the book where I got super bored. The words that she used, like her writing in itself, was really enjoyable. And I also actually got another book from her, Babel, which I'm dying to read. I think that's a little more up my alley, because the thing that I was kind of iffy about, but that's also just not my kind of style, it was a very anxious read. It was kind of like so high stakes with where the story went. She also, like the main character, was a very anxious person, and I'm also a very anxious person, so I feel like we were a really good match. And I think that's also how it was supposed to feel. Like obviously the main character is not really lovable, not even necessarily likable, but it just sometimes kind of pushed me off the edge, and I was like reading it and I was like, this is making me so anxious. I kind of don't want to continue. The reading experience itself wasn't like the most fun, but the book itself and the story and the writing was really good. So I would also say definitely 4.25 stars if you're interested in any of like the publishing industry and how like ethnicity plays a role in that, or just in general some, I wouldn't necessarily say it was like in-depth societal analysis, but it definitely did play onto some of like society's standards and ideas. So if you're interested in that at all, I would definitely recommend. It was a good read. We're staying with the fiction here, and the next book I'm going to talk about is Firefly Lane by Christine Hanna. And first of all, I'm not an emotional reader. Like, I want to read a fantasy book that makes me fall in love with a new world and like different characters and takes me out of the present one and just kind of gives me like a good story with dragons, preferably. I'm not somebody who seeks out like a good cry in a book, because I'm also not really a person who likes to cry a lot. Let me first say, this is a beautiful book. If you want to have a super emotional read, something that kind of plays like a movie in your head, super easy to follow along, kind of addictive to read too, and characters that are very much real because they're like kind of damaged, kind of traumatized, but also yes, with aspirations and passions, definitely go for this book, or I think this author in general. I think Kristen Hanna is kind of known for that kind of topic or that kind of feel. I want to say like 300 pages of this I flew through. I read the first 300 pages in probably like 2 evenings. It was absolutely crazy. I couldn't put it down. And then, because there's kind of a little bit of like a love triangle thing going on, not to spoil anything, but I thought that it says on the cover, a lifetime of friendship, moment of betrayal. And I thought that the betrayal would be cheating, and I cannot. Like, cheating is the one thing that I'm like, don't want anything to do with it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't ever want to be associated with it. So I'm like, for a second there, I thought about DNFing this book because it threw me off so hard that I thought it was about cheating when it really wasn't. Like, there is not any cheating in this book at all, and I think if I wouldn't have thought that way, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. So I kind of ruined it for myself because I took like a big break after the first 300 pages I flew through, so it definitely ruined the flow of the book for me. In saying that, the ending, oh my god, I cried so hard. And as I said, I don't really like to cry a lot. I don't cry a lot. I don't really like to read books that make me cry because I'm like, why should I be depressed if I could also just read a happy book? This was so bad. Louis was in bed with me and I was reading like the last maybe like 100 or 80 pages and I was sobbing, like tears running down my face. I couldn't even see the pages because I was like just trying to see through the tears, and he looked at me and he was like, are you sure you want to like do this? And I'm like, it's okay. It was hilarious. So yeah, I mean, if you want to have a good cry, if you want to have a heart-wrenching story about friendship and what real life can sometimes look like and how sometimes it's not the way that you thought it would be, but it's still really beautiful. If you just need like a book that makes you feel hard, this is definitely the book for you. At the end of the day, the writing was insane, and even though it kind of made me feel a little bit depressed, it also made me feel a lot. So I think 4 stars. Speaking of depressing books, The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Oh my god, this was crazy. Let me just quickly read you the back of this so you know kind of what the gist is, because I didn't read the back of this and it kicked me in the ass. I should have watched the trigger warnings for this because it says, when Esther Greenwood wins an internship on a New York fashion magazine in 1953, she is elated, believing she will finally realize her dream to become a writer. But in between the cocktail parties and piles of manuscripts, Esther's life begins to slide out of control. She finds herself spiraling into depression and eventually a suicide attempt as she grapples with difficult relationships in a society which refuses to take women's aspirations seriously. I should have read the back of this because I did not know that this was going into depression. I did not know that this had a suicide attempt in it, and I was shocked. It starts out as like a normal little cute book, just normal. You kind of see like some red flags, but you're like, I'm sure she'll be fine, and then all of a sudden she's like just dead end, like in it for good. She doesn't really know a way out of it. You're completely wrapped up in like the depressedness of the story. So this is a classic, and I can see why, because some lines here, they hit hard, especially talking about that this was published in 1963. Some of these things that are said in this book is absolute gold for like feminism, women empowerment, anti-patriarchy, which I'm all for. Again, I'm like, I don't really like reading depressing books because I'm like, why should I want to be depressed if I could just read a happy book? I'm glad that I read this. I would recommend it if you want to go for a classic that's obviously really short. Like, this was only 230-ish pages. It's really easy to read. It's also like not like difficult English. It's very easy English. So if you have never read a classic and you are kind of into feministic ideas at all, I would definitely recommend you try this with the depression and the suicide attempt in mind, because I didn't, and it really shocked me. But I really want to read you one quote that I read to a couple people actually, because it just shocked me. So let me see if I can find this. I got it, everybody. Okay, hold on tight because this eats. Okay, I tried to imagine what it would be like if Constantine were my husband. It would mean getting up at 7 and cooking him eggs and bacon and toast and coffee and dawdling about in my nightgown and curlers after he'd left for work to wash up the dirty plates and make the bed. Then when he came home after a lively, fascinating day, he'd expect a big dinner, and I'd spent the evening washing up even more dirty plates till I fell into bed, utterly exhausted. This seemed a dreary and wasted life for a girl with 15 years of straight A's, but I knew that's what marriage was like, because cook and clean and wash was just about what Buddy Willard's mothers did from morning till night, and she was the wife of a university professor and had been a private school teacher herself. Here it comes. Once when I visited Buddy, I found Mrs. Willard braiding a rug out of strips of wool from Mrs. Willard's old suits. She'd spent weeks on that rug, and I had admired the tweedy browns and greens and blues patterning the braid, but after Mrs. Willard was through, instead of hanging the rug on the wall the way I would have done, she put it in place of her kitchen mat, and in a few days it was soiled and dull and indistinguishable from any mat you could buy for under $1 in the 5 and 10. And I knew that in spite of all the roses and kisses and restaurant dinners a man showered on a woman before he married her, what he secretly wanted when the wedding service ended was for her to flatten out underneath his feet like Mrs. Willard's kitchen mat. I mean, come on. If that isn't actual gold, and this was written in the 1960s when it was normal to cook and clean and wash and have kids and that's all you did. So I think this was a really essential step in women emancipation. If you're interested in that, I would recommend. If you're not, definitely don't read this book. I do give this a 4.25 stars. I think it's a really important story to have been told in that time. Lastly, and I actually just finished this yesterday night, we have The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I borrowed this of my friend Elena, so if you're watching this, thank you for letting me read this. And also I really want to talk to you about it. This is a thriller slash mystery, and I was afraid I couldn't read this on my own because Luis is at work a lot currently, so I was like, can I read this when I'm by myself, or am I gonna be super scared and just not be able to sleep and chill? But it was actually fine. I say up until like the 200 page mark, it was totally fine. It was a good setup of the story. I think the pacing was obviously incredible. I feel like every thriller needs to have great pacing. The chapters were really short. It was really easy to understand. There was always something happening, and obviously every chapter left on a cliffhanger, so that was very easy to go through. The main character in this, maybe another trigger warning, is consuming a lot of alcohol slash is kind of alcoholic, so throwing that out there in case that might be triggering for anybody. But I think this was really cool, especially because it kind of did what you want from a thriller, where it keeps you on the edge of the seat and you don't really know who is responsible for what is happening. And what's really cool about this is there's multiple characters and it kind of switches the focus. I'm not gonna say anymore because obviously I don't want to spoil anything, but it kind of switches the focus often, and it takes you by surprise and it makes you think things that are not happening, but then you think they're happening, but then you go back again and you're like, oh, actually this is just left open and now I think that it's happening, but then you realize it isn't happening. Like, it was just a lot of fun up until the point where there was like one little phrase when I read that and I was by myself. I literally called Luis and I was like, can you please get home now? I'm spooked the fuck out because of this book. It did pass though. Like, I just read on, it did pass. It wasn't as bad, and it kind of turns like very psychological, kind of like metaphysical, not like ghost story-ish, but it's definitely not like reality based and reality focused, which I enjoyed. I thought that was really cool little spin-off that I didn't see coming. Obviously the last few pages were a little bit wild, just all over the place, kind of like, well, pow, over here, and then this happened, and then oh my god, what is this, and who did that, and now we find out this, but then did he really do that? Oh my god, no. And then she's like taking chances. Like, it's very much a back and forth in the end, but I thought it was fun. I am really glad that it didn't spook me out as much, and I did really enjoy it. I think it's a good thriller, and I am definitely looking forward to reading some more Riley Sager. I would give this a 3.75 because I'm not really a thriller mystery girly, but I did really enjoy it. Okay, so these were all the books that I read in the months of November and October. I really hope that you enjoyed. I really love these books, and I also just love talking about it, and I really hope that we can maybe get a little conversation started in the comments, because I just really like talking about books, and not a lot of people in my close environment read a lot of the books that I do. So, and also I do have one more question for you if you're still hanging around now. Thank you so much, I really appreciate you. I wanted to start this little brick duology, and this is The Priory of the Orange Tree, and then the kind of prequel, as I heard, The Day of the Fallen Knight. And I mean, look at those, these are absolutely gorgeous, and I think these could be like right up my alley because it's fantasy. I think it's definitely high fantasy. I hope there's not too much romance in it. It's definitely like a big universe. There's obviously dragons in this, as you can see, and I have been thinking about doing a reading vlog for both of these because I just really want to share my reading experience, but I'm not too sure if you guys are interested at all. So maybe let me know in the comments down below if you would at all be interested in a reading vlog of these two, because I would love to make one. But yeah, thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video on Sunday. Bye bye.